There's a line in space that nothing built by human hands has ever crossed. Not a border on a map, not an orbit, not a planet's edge, a distance, a pure physical distance so vast that even light, the fastest thing that exists, needs a full day to cross it. Later this year, a machine the size of a small car built with less computing power than the key fob for a modern car is going to cross that line. It launched before most of the people reading this were born. It was designed to last 4 years. It has been flying for nearly 50. And right now, in the final stretch before it reaches a distance no spacecraft has ever reached, engineers are attempting something on it that has never been tried before, with no way to undo it if it goes wrong. This is the story of Voyager 1, and it is not a story about the past. It is a story about something that is happening right now, quietly 15 billion miles away, while almost nobody is watching. Stick with this one because by the end, the number 1 light day is going to mean something completely different to you than it does right now. It is the kind of number that sounds abstract the first time you hear it, and then never quite lets go of you once you understand what it actually demands from the people trying to keep a conversation going across it. This channel covers stories like this every week. The real science, the actual data without the exaggeration. If that is what you are here for, subscribe now because we are just getting started. Let's start with the number itself, because until you understand what it actually costs to communicate across this kind of distance, nothing else in this story will land the way it should. A light day is exactly what it sounds like. It is the distance that light travels in 24 hours, moving at roughly 186,000 miles every single second. The fastest anything in this universe is permitted to move. Light crosses the distance from the Sun to the Earth in about 8 minutes. It crosses the distance to the outer planets in a few hours. To travel 1 full light day, light has to cover more than 16 billion miles. For almost the entire history of human civilization, nothing we have ever built has traveled anywhere close to that far from home. Voyager 1 is about to. Later this year, Voyager 1 will pass 16 billion miles from Earth, and at that exact distance, a radio signal sent from a ground station on this planet traveling at the absolute speed limit of the universe will take 24 hours just to arrive. Not to get a response, just to arrive. If a member of the mission team sends a routine command on a Monday morning, the spacecraft will not receive it until Tuesday morning. If it responds instantly, that response will not reach Earth until Wednesday morning. A single exchange, a single question, and a single answer will cost 2 full days of waiting. And there is nothing anyone can do to speed that up. It is not a limitation of the equipment. It is a limitation of physics itself. No human-made object has ever operated at that kind of remove from the people who built it. Not a satellite, not a probe, not anything. And Voyager 1 is not going to pause when it reaches that line. It is going to keep moving through it at more than 38,000 miles per hour, deeper into a region of space that has never once had a working scientific instrument inside it before this spacecraft arrived. To understand why this moment matters as much as it does, you have to go back to where this machine actually started. Because the distance it is about to cross is only remarkable once you understand how it got there. In September of 1977, a rocket lifted off from Kennedy Space Center, carrying a spacecraft that nobody expected to be discussed 50 years later. The mission plan was modest by design. Fly past Jupiter, fly past Saturn, take pictures, collect measurements, then drift into silence somewhere in the early 1980s. Its job finished, its data archived, its story essentially over 4 years, maybe 5, if the hardware held up better than expected. That was the entire plan. Voyager 1 blew through that timeline almost immediately. It reached Jupiter in 1979 and returned the first genuinely close images of that planet's storms and moons that human eyes had ever seen. It reached Saturn in 1980, using the gravity of each planet along the way like a slingshot, gaining speed and distance with every pass, turning a modest reconnaissance mission into something that no one on the original engineering team had actually planned for. By the time the 1980s ended, it had already become the most distant object humanity had ever launched. And it was still transmitting, still functioning, still built on hardware that would be considered primitive before most currently practicing aerospace engineers were born. Then, in August of 2012, 35 years after launch, Voyager 1 did something that changed the entire nature of the mission. It crossed the helipause and became the first human-made object in history to leave the solar system entirely. That sentence deserves a moment because it gets said quickly, and it deserves better than that. The sun is not just a source of light and heat. It constantly releases a stream of charged particles called the solar wind, blowing outward in every direction, inflating an enormous bubble of influence that surrounds our entire planetary system. Every planet, every moon, every asteroid, and every spacecraft humanity has ever launched exists inside that bubble. The outer edge of it, the point where the pressure of the solar wind finally gives out, and the pressure of the galaxy itself takes over, is called the helipause. It is not a metaphorical boundary. It is a real physical measurable line, roughly 120 times farther from the sun than Earth is. Crossing it means leaving the environment our star controls and entering the environment the galaxy controls. Voyager 1 did that in 2012. It has been in interstellar space in the true literal sense of that phrase for over a decade, and it has been sending data back the entire time. Now, for years, that in itself was already an extraordinary story. A machine built in the 1970s, sitting outside the boundary of the solar system, reporting on conditions no instrument had ever measured directly, and what it reported back did not match what decades of theoretical models had predicted. Before Voyager 1 actually reached interstellar space, the working assumption among physicists was that the environment beyond the helipause would be relatively calm, a thin, cold, quiet expanse where charged particles drifted slowly and not much happened. The kind of static backdrop that fills the space between one star system and the next. Starting several years after the crossing, an instrument on board began detecting something that did not fit that picture at all. A persistent, narrow, ongoing signal in the surrounding plasma. Not a single spike that could be written off as noise, but a sustained emission that kept showing up year after year across hundreds of millions of miles of the spacecraft's ongoing path. Researchers who studied the data concluded that interstellar space was not the smooth, uniform void the models had described. It had structure at scales ranging from a few meters up to distances measured in millions of miles. It behaved less like an empty background and more like an environment with genuine weather texture that nobody had been able to detect because nothing had ever been inside it to measure it directly before. That distinction turned out to matter for reasons that reach back to Earth. The helipause is not simply a scientific curiosity. It functions as a shield deflecting a large share of the high-energy cosmic radiation that constantly streams in from distant, long-dead stars. Radiation that would otherwise reach much deeper into the solar system than it currently does. If the environment pressing against that shield from the outside is more turbulent and more energetic than the models assumed, then the natural next question is how consistent that protection actually is, and whether it behaves the same way over the kind of timescales that matter for the long-term stability of a solar system and everything living inside it. Nobody currently has a complete answer. But the fact that the question now has to be asked at all seriously by people who study this for a living is itself a direct result of one aging spacecraft continuing to transmit long after anyone expected it to. But something has been quietly changing about this mission over the past several years. And it is almost nothing to do with distance and almost everything to do with power. Voyager 1 does not run on solar panels. This far from the sun, sunlight is far too weak to generate meaningful electricity. Instead, it runs on 3 radioisotope thermoelectric generators, devices that convert the heat produced by the natural decay of plutonium-238 into usable electrical power. At launch, those 3 generators produced roughly 470 watts combined, enough to run 10 separate scientific instruments along with the systems needed to point the spacecraft warm its components, and transmit its findings back to Earth. But plutonium-238 decays at a steady, predictable, unstoppable rate. Every single year, without exception, the spacecraft's available power drops by roughly 4 watts. There's no way to refuel it. There's no way to service it. There's no way to slow the decay down. It is simply going to keep happening year after year for as long as the mission continues, until the power available finally falls below the minimum needed to run anything at all. Nearly 50 years into the mission, that slow, silent countdown has become the defining fact of the entire operation. Of the 10 scientific instruments Voyager 1 carried at launch, most have already been switched off. Not because they failed, but because the mission team made the deliberate choice to sacrifice them in order to keep the spacecraft alive and keep the remaining instruments running for as long as possible. Every single one of those decisions is effectively permanent. There is no way to turn an instrument back on once the team decides the power budget can no longer support it, at least not under normal circumstances. Earlier this year, that reality forced the hardest decision the team had made in years. In April, engineers commanded Voyager 1 to shut down the low-energy charged particles instrument, a piece of equipment that had been running almost continuously since 1977, measuring the ions, electrons, and cosmic rays surrounding the spacecraft and playing a direct role in helping scientists confirm exactly when the spacecraft crossed out of the solar system in the first place. The decision was not made casually. It was made because a routine maneuver earlier that same year had caused an unexpected dip in the spacecraft's available power, one that came close to tripping an automatic safety system designed to protect the spacecraft by shutting down critical components on its own if the power draw ever exceeds what the generators can supply. Rather than risk losing control of which systems shut down and in what order, the team made the call themselves deliberately in advance on their own terms. The instrument that had been part of the mission for nearly half a century went quiet, not because it broke, but because there was no longer enough power to justify keeping it on. That left the spacecraft with only 2 functioning science instruments: a plasma wave subsystem, which listens for oscillations in the charged particles surrounding the spacecraft, and a magnetometer, which measures the magnetic field of the region Voyager 1 is currently passing through. 2 instruments on a machine that once carried 10, sitting further from Earth than any object in human history. Still transmitting, still working on a power budget that keeps shrinking every single year with no way to stop it. But here's where the story stops being simply about decline. Because the team at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory has not given up on buying back some of that lost time, and what they're attempting is genuinely unprecedented. Internally, engineers have been referring to the plan as the Big Bang, not because of anything explosive, but because of how it works. Instead of making small, incremental changes to how power flows through the spacecraft, testing each one, verifying it worked, and then moving to the next, the plan calls for changing several systems all at once in a single coordinated operation. Certain components would be switched off. Others would be replaced with lower power alternatives that draw less electricity, but still keep the spacecraft warm enough to function. The entire configuration of how power moves through a machine built in the 1970s would be restructured in one attempt, executed all at once rather than gradually. The reasoning behind doing it this way is specifically about risk. During any kind of power reconfiguration, there are unstable in-between moments where the system is neither in its old configuration nor its new one. And those in-between moments are exactly the kind of instability that can trigger the spacecraft's automatic fault protection. The same system the team was trying to avoid tripping back in February. The goal of doing everything simultaneously rather than one step at a time is to spend as little time as possible inside that dangerous transitional window. Because a mistake here cannot be corrected in any normal sense. A single wrong instruction sent across billions of miles to a machine with no on-site engineer, no physical access, and no way to manually intervene could permanently end part or all of the mission with no chance of recovery. Every decision made by this team carries the weight of that irreversibility. Part of what makes this procedure so delicate is that the spacecraft itself was designed using engineering assumptions and programming conventions from an era before most current aerospace software existed. The people who originally built Voyager 1 systems have largely retired. Some have passed away. And the engineers now responsible for keeping it alive had to learn the specific conventions of 1970s spacecraft design, almost as a separate discipline just to be able to write commands the spacecraft can still understand. That knowledge is not something that lives in a manual that anyone can simply hand over. It is carried by a small, specific group of people who have spent years learning how this particular machine thinks. And every procedure this risky depends on that narrow, hard-won expertise being applied correctly the first time, because there usually is not a second chance to try again after a mistake at this distance. Given those stakes, the team chose not to attempt this first on Voyager 1 at all. They are testing it first on its twin Voyager 2, launched just weeks before Voyager 1 in 1977, and currently carrying slightly more available power along with one additional working instrument. Voyager 2 is also somewhat closer to Earth, which matters because it makes the round-trip communication delay involved in testing and verifying each step of the procedure marginally shorter, and it makes a possible failure marginally less catastrophic to the overall mission. Those tests were carried out over the late spring and early summer of this year. Only once the team has confidence that the procedure works cleanly on Voyager 2 will the same reconfiguration be attempted on Voyager 1 itself, the riskier and more distant of the two spacecraft, where every single command takes over 23 hours just to arrive. If it works, the payoff is significant. Engineers have suggested that a successful reconfiguration could extend the operational life of both spacecraft's remaining instruments well into the next decade. And there is one detail buried inside the shutdown of the low-energy charged particles instrument back in April that tells you exactly how much hope the team is holding on to when they powered that instrument down. They did not shut off everything connected to it. A tiny half-watt motor inside the instrument responsible for its scanning mechanism was deliberately left running. Not because it was needed for anything right now. It was left running specifically so that if the Big Bang procedure succeeds and frees up enough power, that instrument has a real chance of being switched back on. Something that almost never happens once a system on this spacecraft goes quiet. That is where things currently stand as Voyager 1 closes in on the distance mark that makes this entire moment historic. Later this year, at a specific calculated moment, Voyager 1 will be exactly 16 billion miles from Earth. Not roughly, not approximately. NASA has calculated the precise time it will happen down to the second. Because the spacecraft's position and velocity are tracked with extraordinary precision, the way you would track anything whose exact location determines whether a signal reaches it at all. At that distance, for the first time in the history of any human endeavor, a radio wave leaving Earth at the literal speed limit of the universe will take a full 24 hours to arrive. Sit with what that actually means for the people running this mission. If a member of the team sends a routine health check to the spacecraft on a Monday morning, the signal will not reach Voyager 1 until Tuesday morning. If Voyager 1 responds the instant it receives that signal with no processing delay at all, that response will not arrive back on Earth until Wednesday morning. A single question and a single answer, the most basic unit of communication there is, will now cost a minimum of 2 full days every single time with absolutely no way to speed it up. There is no version of faster internet or better antennas that fixes this. The delay is not a limitation of the equipment on either end. It is the literal speed of light, the fastest rate at which cause can ever produce effect anywhere in this universe. And Voyager 1 is about to sit far enough away that this cosmic speed limit becomes something you can feel in the rhythm of an actual working relationship between a team of engineers and the machine they have spent their careers keeping alive. It is worth remembering that this same team is currently in the middle of executing the riskiest procedure ever attempted on either spacecraft at a moment when the communication delay to Voyager 1 is already sitting at roughly 23.5 hours, just short of the full day it will reach once the light day threshold is crossed. Every diagnostic step in the Big Bang reconfiguration, every command, every verification that a change was received and executed correctly, is already happening across a gap of very nearly a full day each way. The milestone the spacecraft is approaching is not a separate, unrelated event happening to arrive around the same time as the power procedure. It is the same story told from two different angles. A spacecraft running out of power attempting an unprecedented fix while simultaneously drifting toward a distance so extreme that even the instructions meant to save it will take longer to arrive than they ever have before. And once Voyager 1 crosses that line, it does not slow down and it does not stop. There's nothing out there to slow it down. No atmosphere to create drag, no planet close enough to meaningfully pull at it with gravity. It will simply keep moving in very nearly a straight line at the same steady speed, continuing to add roughly 38,000 meters to its distance from Earth with every hour that passes for the rest of its operational life and long after that life ends. The light day mark is not a finish line. It is a point the spacecraft passes through on its way to distances that do not have names yet, because nothing built by human beings has ever needed one before. There is something bolted to the frame of this machine that deserves to be part of the story, because it says something about why this mission was ever attempted in the first place. Both Voyager spacecraft carry a gold-plated copper disc engraved with instructions on how to play it, containing greetings recorded in dozens of human languages, natural sounds from Earth, a broad selection of music drawn from cultures across the planet, and a set of diagrams intended to convey basic facts about who and where we are, including a map built from the positions of pulsars designed to show whoever eventually finds it exactly which star our planet orbits. It was included with the full understanding that neither spacecraft would ever be retrieved, that neither would ever return, and that the record's actual audience, if it has one at all, might not exist yet, might not be found for tens of thousands of years, if it is ever found at all. It exists purely as a gesture, a message sent outward with no expectation of reply, riding on a machine that is currently kept alive by a team of engineers waging a very careful, very patient argument against a shrinking supply of electricity. That contrast is worth sitting with for a second. A record built to outlast the sun itself, riding on hardware so fragile that a single wrong command sent across billions of miles could end its ability to speak at all. Because eventually, regardless of how well the Big Bang procedure works, this mission ends. Not this year, and probably not for several more years after that. But the math is not in question the way the timing is. The generators lose power every single year at a steady, predictable rate. And there's a hard floor beneath which no instrument, no transmitter, and no heater can continue operating. Even in the most optimistic version of events where the power reconfiguration succeeds completely and buys the mission a meaningful amount of extra time, that floor is still coming. Still, at some point in the next decade, the last usable watt will be gone. The last command will go unanswered, and the last signal Voyager 1 ever sends will complete its journey back to Earth and then simply be the final one. There will not be a dramatic ending. There will just be silence where a signal used to be. And a team that has spent the better part of 50 years listening for it will stop having anything left to listen for. What makes that ending matter beyond the emotional weight of it is that there is currently no plan to replace what will be lost. No mission is presently funded, designed, or approved to send another spacecraft to the boundary of the solar system and beyond it. Reaching that distance takes decades under the best circumstances. And even if a new mission were greenlit today, it would not arrive anywhere near where Voyager 1 currently sits for a very long time. Every measurement Voyager 1 sends back between now and the moment its power finally runs out is data that nothing else can currently provide from a region of space that no other instrument is anywhere close to reaching. When the signal stops, the only real-time window humanity has ever had into that part of the universe closes with it. And it stays closed for longer than most of the people watching this will be alive to see it reopen. That is what makes the coming light day milestone worth paying attention to beyond the raw novelty of the number itself. It is not simply the moment a machine gets farther away than any machine has ever been. It is a marker sitting almost exactly on top of the riskiest technical gamble this mission has ever attempted. At the exact moment the spacecraft's remaining power is thinner than it has ever been, carrying a message meant to outlast every civilization that will ever exist to send one. Every one of those threads is happening at once right now to the same 49-year-old machine 16 billion miles from the people who built it and are still somehow, after all this time, listening. The number is easy to say, one light day. It takes about 2 seconds to read that phrase out loud. What it actually costs to close that gap in engineering, in patience, in risk, and nearly 5 decades of decisions made by people who mostly will never know exactly how the story ends, does not fit into 2 seconds at all. It has taken 49 years to get here, and it is going to take everything this mission has left just to keep the signal coming once it does. Think about what is actually true at this exact moment while this is playing. A spacecraft designed before anyone had a computer in their home is sitting further from the people who built it than any object in history. Kept alive by a handful of engineers, translating decades-old programming conventions into commands sent across a gap that now takes very nearly a full day to close in each direction. It is running on a fraction of the power it started with, carrying a message intended for a species that may not exist yet, attempting a procedure that has never been tried before, with no way to take it back if it fails. None of that stopped when the cameras were not on it. None of it depends on anyone watching. It is simply what is happening right now, quietly 16 billion miles away, whether or not anyone down here is paying attention to it. If you want to see this play out in real time, if you want to know whether the Big Bang procedure holds, and whether that instrument comes back online, and what happens the moment this spacecraft actually crosses that line, subscribe to channel and turn on notifications because this is a story we are going to keep following exactly as closely as the team at NASA is following it. Leave a comment with what part of this surprised you the most. And if you think someone else should understand what is actually happening out there right now, send this to them because a story like this deserves more attention than the quiet way it has been unfolding so far. Thanks for watching.